Okay, great. Let's kick things off. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Modern Finance Stack webinar. I'm Taimur. I'm one of the founders and CEO of a company called Causal, and I'm super excited to be here today with three wonderful guests who I'll introduce in a sec. But just in terms of logistics and housekeeping, we're aiming to have a discussion for about 30 or 40 minutes. If you have any questions that you want to ask during the webinar, please leave them in the Zoom chat, and we'll try and save a few minutes at the end for questions, 5 minutes or so, and then we'll wrap things up in about 45 minutes. Brings me great pleasure to introduce our guests today. First off, we have Dan. Dan is the VP of Finance at Mercury. Dan has worked across banking, private equity, and also on the finance side at Square and Digit before joining Mercury about 2 years ago now, I think. We're also joined by Dor. Dor is on the finance team at Deal. She was actually the first finance hire there and has seen the company scale from about 20 to now sort of 4,000 people over the last few years. And last but not least, we have Sasha. Sasha is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Puzzle. Puzzle is a modern accounting system, and Sasha was previously the co-founder and CEO of a company called LendUp as well. So thank you all for joining. Super excited to be chatting to you. Maybe to kick us off, I mean, the topic today is about the modern finance stack. It's about sort of modern finance tools that companies use to run more efficiently. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you guys, first of all, kind of structure the different parts of your finance teams within your companies, and then which tools kind of support the different parts of the team and the different processes that you have. And so, Sasha, curious to sort of your experience of the finance stack at LendUp versus now at Puzzle. You guys are sort of 40 or 50 people, right?
Yeah, 53 as of today, hopefully 54 as of tomorrow. But yeah, so I think that to answer your question, back in started my first company in 2011, which was quite a while ago. And basically everything was manual. Like when you wanted payroll, you would call up, you go to websites and you would call up and try and get a hold of a salesperson. And then you had to like convince them to get your payroll. And when you wanted a bank account, you had to go in and fill out paperwork in a local branch. And when you wanted to accept payment processing, almost forget about it. But there was a company called Authorize.net. And not only would they store and keep all your data and you couldn't do it, getting payment processing was just insane. Spend management, that wasn't even a thing. You could not get a corporate card or anything. You were basically just spending months of time trying to get it. So we think about a lot of the capabilities of today. It's really exciting to be able to hire somebody all over the world in the click of a button with Deal, or to be open to actually even open up a bank account online or whatever Mercury's appropriate classification of it is, if it's technically not a bank account. But for all intents and purposes, it's a thing that lets you have a bank account through an interface. And you can just sign up for payroll. Like these are the expectations of today, but this is crazy. Just I think in just a decade ago when I started my first company, none of this was possible. And just to actually functionally operate the business is exciting. And then now, because you can actually do it and operate all the business. And then, I mean, not to like plug our favorite FP&A tool, but like all of this is important inputs to be able just to even have a refinement. I mean, just think a decade ago, this was a manual process to even try and understand what the future state of your business is. And now you can do this all in a few clicks. In a day, you could probably have almost everything set up and understand your runway and financial planning and budgeting. That's just unheard of without a massive team just a decade ago.
Yeah. And so what are the kind of the core parts of your stack at Puzzle? It sounds like you're using Mercury for banking, Deal for some payroll employment stuff.
I mean, we try and adopt basically a modern stack because our customers need a modern stack. So we like all of the modern tools. That's sort of the Mercury and the Brex and the Meows, or I think the more modern stack for that, the Ramps and the Bills, and now the Mercuries and the Brexes for payables, Stripe, obviously for billing, a lot of other cool stuff is coming up for accounts receivable, Gusto, Rippling, and Deal for payroll. Like all these things are incredible innovations and great.
Nice. And Dan, what about you guys? I mean, I imagine you've sort of seen a few generations of finance tools from your time at Square and then Digit and now at Mercury. Um, yeah, what were sort of the tools you were using back in the day, and what does Mercury's finance team and finance setup look like today?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been the first finance hire twice now. It's always kind of fun. I think every single time I've done it, the set of tools that are available are just so different.
Yeah,
I actually feel like we are going through a little bit of a renaissance period of, innovation and actually like evolution of finance tools, which like, we were a segment that we're pretty unloved for, I feel like a very long time. So I remember when I was at Square and we were, preparing to go IPO, and you obviously need to up level the way that your systems work. You need to build in a lot more controls around financial reporting and a lot of that good stuff when it comes to SaaS controls and so on. And so, we were working with Oracle, we're working with Workday, ADP, we were using BlackLine, a lot of these like old school tools, and they're honestly not the greatest tools. We needed an army of like system admins to actually just have Oracle function. And like, actually, that only gets you 50% of there. I still need to spend 50% of like the accounting team's time, like in Excel spreadsheets, pulling data from multiple places because they don't integrate into Oracle, right? Then you got to transform it, do a bunch of pivot tables that are probably going to break. So you need like 2 manager reviews before you can actually get it into Oracle so that you can actually see what your financial reports are, which is like, I think it's awesome. Stock's just working on, addressing a lot of these problems. So I just think the evolution of tools that are available are pretty amazing to see over time. And like here at Mercury, we didn't have a finance team up until I joined about 2 years ago now, and just being able to like rethink what the overall stack looks like. I think Mercury's a little bit unique because we obviously build a lot of products for our own use cases as well. But yeah, I think it's like the ability to consolidate tools versus having to go integrate 6, 7 different point solutions the way that we've had to do before is like pretty amazing, game changing. Like I have an accounting team of 3 people on the GL side when we're doing like hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, right? And like that would just like make no sense, like just probably years ago.
We had 15 at my last company, just for comparison, like a decade ago.
That's crazy. And thanks for sharing that, Dan. Yeah, I think the Oracle world, I mean, I've interacted with that world a little bit because some of our customers use NetSuite and we have to integrate with that. But it is a sort of a radically different world, I think, than the tools that we use in-house and that we're very used to. And Dor, obviously, a Deal, Deal is one of these modern finance tools. I imagine you guys are probably using Deal for a bunch of stuff. What does the rest of the finance stack look like, and even the finance team more generally?
So in general, I run the entire team. So it's funny you say it because we use Oracle, but we build our own treasury. We started with building our own treasury system. So I have a team of 4 or 5 now, product and engineering, that build my own treasury system because we didn't find any tool. There was nothing available that was for us. So we integrated all our banks, 700 bank account, into the system, into the treasury system. Then what we did, we built our own reconciliation that is automatic. You are laughing there, but it was a pain. We built our own reconciliation that is automatic and is reconciling in any point in time, in any transaction we are getting, everything is live. Then we noticed that we can't go IPO like that, and it will not work for us to have 105 entities globally. So we need to do something. So we build our own integration to NetSuite, and today no ledger is being created manually, nothing, 0. Nice. So everything in my accounting is automatic. Although I have 65 people in the accounting team running all my entities, it doesn't mean they do manual stuff, because if you do it manually, it's a pain. Then you need to add to yourself that also the accounting and the auditors changed. Now they don't want samples anymore. They want to have the entire thing. So they plug into your system and they start checking it with a lot of data checks that they do themselves. So they check the entire thing and no sampling anymore. So this is something to take into consideration. So all your tools need to get an upgrade. And the tools around Oracle, it's a pain. Even when you build your own integration, it run very slowly, even when you are at the highest tier that they are allowing you. So basically, it's a matter of the right tools to be set to the business.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I guess you guys are quite unique in that you need an entity in all of the different countries in which you operate for your customers. So that's quite an insane finance setup. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think we started Causal 5 years ago. I think we've been quite spoiled that I never really had to sort of personally use some of these older tools, the Oracles of the world. Mercury was our first bank account, didn't have to visit a branch. A deal was how we employed our first people. Again, just did everything online there. Unfortunately, Puzzle wasn't kind of ready at the time, so we are still using QuickBooks. But again, it was relatively easy to set up. But I feel like I don't have the sort of personal comparison points of like what things were like back in the day versus today. I'm curious what you guys think are kind of what part of the finance workflows you guys think have become significantly more productive with modern tools and automation. I mean, one thing that I feel like I take for granted, we use Ramp for our spend management, corporate cards. It seems obvious to me that, of course, this should be connected to my accounting system. Of course, it should automatically tag and categorize my expenses and put it all in there. From what I understand, 10, 20 years ago, that's not how it worked. But yeah, in your guys' opinion, what part of the finance workflow has had the biggest productivity gains with modern tools? And maybe Dan, we can start with you on this one.
Yeah, for sure. I think the ability to move money has changed quite a bit. If you work with legacy bank accounts, right? Even being able to send out a wire or like very simple things that shouldn't be so painful actually cause a lot of operational headaches. Like I remember at my past startup, there were all these hidden controls and layers within my Chase account, and that was trying to set up a reverse wire drawdown. And then for whatever reason, like our employee base grew too much, it tripped some like limit that I had no idea that even existed, and it actually caused like a huge issue with us like paying employees, right? So I think just ability to move money not only on the banking layer, but if you think about actually being able to pay vendors, pay employees, get paid by customers as well on the AP, AR, like payroll reimbursement side, all these things have become so much simpler where the payment piece of it has been a little bit abstracted, and you only need to really worry about the software layer and like the pieces that are actually employed or customer facing and so on. I think that's like a pretty new world that we live in that we take for granted, where if I talk to my controller, like the last company she was at, public company, like modern company, they IPO'd in the past like 4 years or so. Well, she ran the AP department, and the CFO at that company still insisted on mailing out paper checks, printing out all invoices, and making sure they're filed and literally filed in a cabinet for suspension period, right? And it's kind of absurd that like that is actually how accounting departments operated for, actually like there are companies who still operate that way today. And the ability to actually make a payment with all the right controls and all the right approval flows, and like honestly in like a matter of seconds online through some of these newer tools, it's actually quite amazing to me. Just on the operational side, frees up your team, you can scale your team much better, and like you want to hire people who like want to engage on more strategic problem solving, thinking about the business and so on. You could actually hire people and free up their time to actually go do that now.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I would never expected that just kind of moving your own money around, there'd be kind of roadblocks in the way, and your bank account and so on. Sasha, what about you? I mean, at LendUp, you probably saw all of the finance evolution. What area do you think has been kind of the biggest productivity gain with new tools?
Yeah, as the resident old person on the webinar, yeah, I think there's like the thing that I think has been really exciting is the ability to be creative with your business, and your business model wasn't really possible. Like your business model was limited by the software of your finance and accounting team, I think. And so right now you can think about spinning up and creating an entirely different pricing model in Stripe in like a minute. And you can hire somebody all over the world in a couple clicks. Like that's great. You now have global access to talent, and you can stay compliant with Deel. I could hire somebody all over the world. We have people from all over the world. And like, it's not oh my God, how are we going to figure out how to make this work? Like, that's just not a thing anymore. And then the part, so that's the part that I sort of like, but how that also comes together is it allows you to have more creativity. It adds more complexity, I think, for the accounting and the finance team. But I think one of the other pieces is as Lineup scaled to 100 million revenue and Mission Lane to 300 million of revenue, I've been on the board of multiple companies. And one of the more frustrating things is the ability to have a meaningful discussion about the finances of a company at a board meeting. And what I think the biggest changes that happened was the ability to get this data together in a structured and organized way to understand financial health, to have meaningful conversations about what to do. It used to be in the boardroom or a fundraising, like, I think, because you could use data, right? One of the biggest frustrations is your CFO or your head of finance was like the only person around the boardroom without their computer open. They had a notepad and a piece of paper, and they'd write down questions. They'd say, I'll get back to you in like a week or two. Because it was so hard to get all of this data together and organized to be able to have conversations without the facts of a business. So I think the ability to create business models, have the facts together so you can have that meaningful conversation at the board level about these are the facts, what do we do to make our business better, is now getting more and more possible because of, I think, all these tools. That's the biggest change that I see. And so that gets me really excited.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's super interesting. We're not quite at the stage where we kind of have, our team is about sort of 20 people in total. So we're not at the stage where we have kind of super formal board meetings and, a CFO and so on. And, it's still the founders kind of, who are pretty close to all of this stuff. But I mean, one thing we hear a lot from our customers is like, yeah, if there's some kind of exec meeting or some kind of board meeting, exactly as you mentioned, Sasha, it's like there's a bunch of questions. You actually can't answer them in real time. And so the conversation kind of has to stop and move on to the next thing. And then you go back to it the next week or a few days later. Yeah.
But you probably think about this stuff all the time, given you're the co-founder and CEO of Causal. But for a lot of people that are founding companies, they're just really passionate about solving a problem. And so the thought of being able to have the conversation that you guys can have, and because of the software that you built, is like an incredible superpower that almost anybody can have now, even if they don't have a background in accounting and finance. And to be able to have those meaningful conversations with your finance team as founders is now more possible and easier than before. Those are some of the most important conversations you have as a company. It's about the money and the people of the organization. What are you doing with them to generate returns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges with adopting new tools is that you kind of have to make sure that they can do what you need them to do today, but it can also sort of scale with you over the next stage of the company. It might be the next year, it might be the next 3 years. Dora, it'd be great to start with you here. Obviously, you guys have scaled insanely fast. I think like 0 to 4,000 people in like 5 years. With that kind of level of change happening constantly in the company, how do you think about adopting new software tools, given how different the business is going to be even a year down the line?
I think that at Deel, I find it very hard to have a tool that come out of the system. I'll give an example. We just integrated Tipalti and Flowcast, both of them doing different stuff. Tipalti is doing the expenses, and Flowcast is helping us with accounting management around the world and closing the books. And then when you integrate it, you always have something missing in the flow that you need to integrate yourself. So there is no, I hate this word, but there is no one-stop shop for everything. It just doesn't exist. So you always need to have someone that will plug it together. And then what I do with my team is always make sure that everything is integrated into my database, and I can plug and play and check the systems. And everything is in Looker. We use Looker or Snowflake. Even my accounting is in there, so I can always check how it performs. But the most important part is to onboard the software quick and to start using it, and then to see what happened, and also to plan that it will go together with all of your other tools. And have your, data or product team making sure that it's actually integrated fully and tested it all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think getting that stuff into the database and exposing it in Looker, that's super interesting. I think one of the areas, just from talking to the companies that we work with, one of the areas that I've noticed in which most companies don't seem to sort of change their ways too much is how they actually store and report on their finance data. From what I've seen, most companies, you end up setting up some kind of data warehouse. You have a BI tool like Looker, and that becomes the go-to place for almost all of the numbers in the business, except for the financial data. You probably won't have your P&L in there. It's very rare that employees will have a sense of, hey, how much money we're spending.
I'll tell you 2 things about this.
Yeah.
One, accounting team, they are prehistorical.
Okay.
They even, like, I give an example, a funny example. When you send them a MacBook, they are telling you, I don't know what to do now. They prefer a Windows computer. So it's kind of, that is the type of people, and they are changing within. So they don't know what to do, and they are pretty afraid. So they prefer to use their own accounting softwares with ledgers. Then also remember that when we are using data, it's not accounting wise on the revenue, on the revenue recognition of it, but also you don't have ledgers. And when you don't have ledgers, it kind of fall into a place where, okay, so I don't know what is my balance. And then the accounting go wrong.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously the structure of a GL is kind of different to the structure of a general database. You have to make sure you handle that really well. I mean, Dan, at Mercury, what does the sort of general BI data setup look like, and to what extent is the sort of finance stuff integrated as part of that?
Yeah, I actually love this topic. So in setup, we use Snowflake, Redshift, and then we use like a analytics layer called Metabase. But I think a lot of times, obviously, leadership team, like Ahmad, our CEO, obsess about data a lot, right? It's like running a tech startup, like you want to understand retention, you want to understand customer activity, cohort it, segment it, like cut it in like 100 different ways. But a lot of times the financial information actually gets treated as like, oh, that's not data. That's like its own separate information, right? When actually it's like, that is the data that you need to understand the health of the business, right? And I think the bridge that I always like try to kind of connect the dots on is like the financial reports and understanding your income statement. Like that is not the end goal, right? Like yes, those are important. Those are what you show to investors and so on. But like, hey, if you want to understand how is my like customer support team scaling, you want to understand like, hey, what is the cost per like CS ticket over time, right? Or you want to understand your unit economics, so you need COGS data that's sitting within your financial information to understand how you get to gross profit per customer and like be able to layer on things like statistical analysis or whatever to get to LTV and so on. Like I feel like just not necessarily thinking about financial information in a silo, but how that really becomes just another building block of data for you to power a lot of the other analyses that actually help you make more of those like concrete business decisions that then feed back into how your business is performing. I think that's like a next evolution that I think people are like just starting to get like really early there on. I think part of it is actually the tooling. I think once the tooling is like there, I think a lot of this becomes a lot easier. It's not dependent on you having some like high-powered like Excel like athlete that's like cranking all this stuff in his.
Yeah, that's one of the big pain points that we try and solve for customers, where obviously you need to do the P&L reporting and budget versus actuals and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, you also need to bring in data from that doesn't live in your accounting system. Things like your number of customers and their usage and all of that kind of stuff probably lives in the data warehouse. And you kind of need to combine those two data sources to then figure out all of the stuff that you mentioned. And so for you guys at Mercury, so is there like do you have like finance stuff in Metabase as well? Like, is there some kind of, I don't know, P&L kind of view in Metabase, or like what kind of stuff are you exposing to the rest of the company and there?
Yeah, we're actually quite transparent on the data side of like how we're doing as a company. So the way that we actually try to do it today is like we are trying to build out like a NetSuite sync into Metabase so that we could then like transform that data and cut in the ways that we do. It's actually like it's harder than you would expect it to, or actually maybe it's not harder than you expect it to, given it's NetSuite, which is like right. But then like things that we do is like we try to keep like a clean like master record spreadsheet, and like those you can upload a spreadsheet into like a data table with it, so on, like run it that way. So it's a little bit hacky, but that's the way we do it today, and like does help provide a little bit of flow of data, even if there's some manual work involved there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sasha, I'm guessing the sense I get from Puzzle is that it's kind of very much about like real-time data in your accounting system, whereas I think generally accounting systems are kind of like data's like 6 weeks out of date or something. You're not sure if the numbers are quite right yet, etc. How how do you guys expose the finance side of the house to the rest of the company? Is that through Puzzle, or do you have a BI tool separately? Or?
Yeah, so I think one of the issues, one of the lessons learned is what Dan Dorr have just been kind of talking about, which is there's this like BI tools, which are sort of data usually pulled in from an engineer who might not have an accounting or finance background, pulling in, and then some finance team trying to work with them to get a structure together to then run some charts and analytics. And then you have your accounting, which is like separate and not really combined. And so what we've done, either accidentally or intentionally, is we've sort of effectively built our own data warehouse and a general ledger structuring agent inside of it. And what that does is it gives us the ability to do data visualization and have it reconciled to the cash of our business, so that when we have our marketing or sales discussions, it's like also what is reconciled to cash. So it flows through together. And so we're all looking at the same data together, whether it's our sort of individual business metrics or our finance or our accounting. And then, so we sort of think about our general ledger like a structuring agent on top of the BI tool. And what that does also, if it's sort of labeled correctly, is it allows you to also have a less hallucinogenic AI to be able to ask sort of tools and questions of the system. And so we're working on this. I don't think both our system or AI are there yet, but I think soon we'll be able to release that. So we're sort of dog fooding it ourselves. But we just use our own tools. And when we feel comfortable, we'll invite a couple people for beta testing, and then we'll release it, because everybody does this. It's like, that's why one of the number one skill sets in finance teams is like coding Python. And the way that I sort of think about that is, well, that's sort of indicative that we have a software problem in a modern finance stack along the way. So we're working on it soon.
Nice. That sounds, that sounds very cool. What do you guys think is kind of like the ideal profile for, someone who is entering the finance function at a startup, this year or next year? I mean, one thing that we've always found useful, we've never had a full-time sort of finance person. It's always been kind of part of the responsibility of like a business operations person. We're still a small company, but we find it super useful for whoever is doing the finance to actually understand SQL and be able to run queries on a database and that kind of thing. Do you feel like that's kind of the direction in which things are heading, where like the sort of the unicorn finance person will be kind of semi-technical? Do you think like AI is actually kind of offsetting that, and actually, you don't have to be that technical to be able to do that kind of stuff? Dan, how do you see things evolving with people who want to get into finance as a career, and the skills that they should have?
Yeah, for sure. I would say like the ability to run SQL queries, or even abilities to like, properly prompt an AI tool and so on. Like those are tools at the end of the day, right? Like the thing that you can't replace is the intellectual curiosity and the problem solving mindset to actually understand what are the right questions to ask, and not just asking one question, but like, oh, cool, like why is that the case? And like digging in deeper, like, oh, what's happening there? And like the person who could actually connect it back, not just to the financials, but actually understand like, hey, what are customers thinking, doing? Why are they churning, right? Versus just being able to like spit out a churn definition. The person that can think through like, hey, this is the product feature that we launched. How do we think that's, impacting retention rates or so on? Like you do want people who could actually think a little bit more interdisciplinary. And I think that actually feeds itself into their ability to work with data as well. It's not just financial data they should be able to work with, but they should understand customer data, operating data. And I think SQL is great as a training tool because it forces you to think about data at a very granular level, but like, how do you define like the exact thing that you want to measure, right? And like, what are the data sets that are available? How do they come together? So I typically find like people who haven't learned like SQL in the past, they're just limited in terms of how deep they could actually dig into the data. But I think the tooling, is getting to a point. I think certainly we'll get to a point where I think the skill set of actually being able to write a SQL query probably gets diminished over time. But again, like the ability to think at multiple levels, at an interdisciplinary level, all the way down to like, how do you truly think about data? I think that skill set is like going to be like needed even more so probably in the future, because just like the wealth of data that we're going to have and then access, and like what you can do with that data is just going to get easier and easier over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorr, at Deel, I mean, how much do finance people have to kind of, do things like run SQL queries and interact with kind of the wider data ecosystem that you guys have?
So because everything is integrated in our side to the data, including NetSuite. So the beauty of it is that if I have a problem, I don't need to deep dive into the ledgers into the accounting software
Okay.
that at the moment gets stuck. What we can do is, one, we can use the data team to pull whatever we need, but I agree with Dan that people need to understand what they want to search for. So they need to understand the entire business in order to be part of a good finance team. And in a fintech company, it's even harder because you need to understand what is a transaction even, or what is the definition of a transaction, where it comes from, what can happen to a transaction along the way, that it can reflect on the business. Also, like technicalities that accountants need to have, but along the way of the business, you have different people, because I'm here from the start and now we are 4,000. So not everyone in a finance team need to be the people that ask the questions. Some of them will be technical accountants, some that need to understand the US GAAP, the IFRS the best, and will need to challenge the gaps and not the business. But some of them, as Dan said, need to actually challenge the business and understand what they do and what they say and where the things come from. And then others need to be very technical in terms of treasury and credit control, on how you even collect or understand if you have people that owe you money. Or so there is so many positions inside the finance that you will have along your way, that the people that you will need will be a bit different with different thinking. But all of them need to be people that love understanding more and more and try every day to learn and understand how they grow, because in the startup business, this is the people that you need in general.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a ton of sense. There's not really any replacement for just sort of genuine curiosity and wanting to understand, hey, why is this thing happening? What's actually going on here? Rather than just sort of spitting out the numbers. Final thing I'd love to get everyone's thoughts on before we maybe move on to Q&A if we have any questions from the audience. Stereotypically back in the day, the finance team was sort of the guys in the corner of the office. They're kind of the gatekeepers to the budgets. And one of the big promises of all of these modern tools is to improve collaboration between finance and the rest of the company. I'd love to understand what that sort of collaboration process looks like for you guys. Is it like, so do you have like a monthly cadence with the exec team? Do you have just some like public dashboards that anyone in the company can look at any time? How does the rest of the company interact with finance? Dan, maybe we can start with you guys at Mercury.
Yeah, for sure. I think it starts off actually partnering pretty closely with the different leaders at the company, right? I think where the financials end up, those are really like the outputs of all the energy and all the work that all the various teams did, right? So if you are just like having a quarterly review of like, hey, here's what our financials were and like do better, right? That's not necessarily going to facilitate better outcomes, maybe on the goal setting side and so on. But the question is like, say you want to drive like, hey, we want to grow revenue, 50% like year over year. Cool. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, how do you think about driving that revenue? What does that mean in terms of different channel performance and like the type of levels that you need to hit? How do you think about efficiency and guardrails and so on? And all of this starts off by actually understanding the way that I would just keep going. Like, so like, how does the performance marketing team, for example, actually think about their world, right? Like, as a finance person, I think we should be adept at understanding like, oh, this is how they think about ROAS. Here's how they think about this channel. Here are some of the limitations of like this channel and so on. And I think actually just getting bought into their world and being able to think it from their perspective makes you a lot more dangerous, where I think there does need to be a little bit of a healthy tension between finance and the actual people that they're supporting. But understanding and stepping into their shoes so that you can actually have a collaborative conversation about the way that you think about goal setting and the types of like performance that you actually see more at the input levels versus just purely focusing on like the financial reports and the outputs. I think the financial reporting and like the outputs are important when you kind of think about, cool, like how are we doing as a business overall, and helping set a little bit of the broader context of why the work that each of the individual teams are doing and how it flows into the overall company of the picture, right? I think that's where it's really important. We do have like a spreadsheet where it's like all the key metrics, financial and operating, that we actually like make publicly available to all of our employees internally, so that they actually can have this context in mind, right? It's obviously hard to do, like the more you scale up and you get a little bit sensitive about it, but I think we're going to try to keep that transparency as long as possible so that like people actually do understand, like, oh, here, like, you know, this is the channel I own. Here's how much growth we drove. Here's what that translated in terms of active customers that we have. And like, you could actually follow that logic chain all the way down through like revenue and give people a sense for like how the company's doing. I've always found it like weird when finance teams kind of hide the way the company's doing, even if the company's doing bad, right? Like you should then be in the moment where you're like rallying the troops. Ideally, you have an employee base who's like, you know, they're not just for the ride, but like want to make change and impact actually happen. And I think actually being transparent about that stuff and being honest and trusting your employees with that information actually goes a pretty long way.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we try and take a pretty transparent approach as well. We have our sort of QuickBooks kind of P&L in Causal. Anyone can access that, updates automatically, you know, once a month. And then we have other sort of KPI type dashboards in there as well. Sasha, what does that look like for you guys in terms of the rest of the company interacting with finance?
Yeah, it reminded me. So it's a complicated thing. So we're really transparent, as you could imagine, being accounting software with the company, and so everybody can see everything. But it adds a little extra layer of complexity. It reminds me of a story of how complicated building a business is. There's like a part art and a part science. Like the science part is sort of accounting, that's the sort of truth of your data, and the finance is kind of the art component. And when you can't just release data without context, because it can be really scary, especially in a startup. So I'll tell a story of my last week. We were scaling really rapidly. In Q4, we had a very cyclical business. In Q4, we would generate about 40 to 50% of all of our revenue, but we would also spend most of our marketing in Q4. And so marketing, obviously you spend in advance and then you sort of collect the revenue later. And so one of our accountants in Q4 thought we were going to go bankrupt because our marketing spending went up by, tens of millions of dollars. But then you stop the marketing at the end of sort of November, and then in December, January, February, the revenue really kicks in. We never ran out of money. We were just 100 million of revenue and generating free cash flow along the way. But they freaked out because they didn't have the context of, oh my God, if we keep this marketing spend up and we're not seeing a revenue at that same time, obviously there's business drivers, then we're going to collapse. So they caused panic across the entire company. In fact, 4 people quit along the way. And we were like, no, this is like, we've been doing this for years. And so we had to do kind of an all hands. And sometimes I think we forget on the finance team and the leadership team sometimes that sort of numbers, the complication of accounting and finance, absent context, can be really scary to people that aren't very familiar. And so it requires, being transparent requires more time and effort. You can't just be transparent about something as scary as a company P&L and balance sheet without making sure people who are seeing it understand the business drivers and how these things fit together. So we are transparent, but we also spend more time than average so that people understand the drivers of the business and how this comes together. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great story. Wow. Yeah, I think the transparency thing can definitely be a bit of a double-edged sword. We've had that a few times internally, where we want to be transparent about things, how much cash we have in the bank and runway, but we don't want people to get distracted about like, oh well, we've got all this cash. Why don't we go do X, Y, and Z? Why don't we do this and this kind of stuff? And so we've had to try and find that balance as well. Dor, finally for you, I mean, you guys have sort of much bigger scale in terms of employees and the finance function than the rest of us here. What does it look like for finance working with the rest of the team at Deel?
So finance interact with everyone due to the fact that we are a finance and doing an accounting business, kind of. So on the payroll side, you can see my accountant everywhere, speaking to payroll manager and speaking to HRX that are giving them guidance, or sometimes even going to customers meetings. And then my tax team is always going to customers meetings and explaining them what to do or what to have. Or we have a sales kickoff in 2 months, and all my finance team is there to guide everyone through what we do and how we help finance team, because eventually our customers at Deel are the HR, but also the CFOs. So the CFOs understand exactly our tool, and they have lots of questions. So the finance team are there to support, also the sales team, customer success team. So not only the management, I will say, or the sell enablement, but also everyone across the board.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Again, I think you guys probably have quite unique, quite a unique finance function given what the product is and what you guys do. We had one question in the chat. The question is: there's a lot of great tools, but how do you keep your costs in check as you're thinking about implementing different tools and software? Dan, any thoughts on keeping costs in check and not going overboard on lots of different tools?
Yeah. I do think like software tools, not just in finance, but anywhere, can proliferate, right? I think I was looking at this actually recently. I think we use probably 30 or 40 different software tools, and it's kind of mind-blowing how much we actually spend on like SaaS over time. It really adds up. I would say on the finance side, I think the thing, again, that's like quite interesting is that there are a lot of players who are offering consolidation of different solutions, Mercury being one of them. And rather than having to go pay, vendor A, B, and C each their $10,000 or whatever it is, the more you can consolidate, typically for the vendor, it's all cross-sell upside, right? They've already acquired you, so typically there's much more willingness to negotiate. So I think that starts off with understanding what are the requirements for your business and where do you actually want to scale up to as well. It's a pain in the ass to actually switch out any software feature, especially one that touches your employees, touches money, and so on. So be thoughtful about it. Like make sure you understand your requirements, like thinking a year or two ahead. If you were, if you're a 50-person company, what are the tools you need when you're 150 people and so on? And just kind of do a little bit of mental exercise and then see, it's like, hey, cool. Like, are there vendors I work with today that could potentially offer other tools? I feel like Bill Pay is really popular. A lot of people offer. So do I need to go with Bill.com now? Or like, can I actually go do that with, maybe whoever, Mercury, or could it be like someone that you're using for corporate cards and so on? So I just think being thoughtful about like who you use and trying to consolidate vendors as much does help on the cost side. And then I think the thing that's like fun is like there are a lot of great options out there. So like, maybe if you've, depending on your risk appetite, like try out like some of the next gen solutions, like on the on our, like what we use for our monthly close tracker and like Recon. There's actually a great tool out there like that we started using called like Numeric, right? And like the old school tools like Blackline and so on, but like it's actually worked out phenomenally for us and actually makes our accounting team much more efficient. So there's certainly the cost component, but there's also like the team efficiency component as well that like ultimately at the end of the day like translates into dollars either way.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. Thanks for saying. How do you spell Numeric, by the way? Is this numeric.io? AI close automation. Oh, cool. Yeah, looks super interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely grateful to people who adopted Causal in the very early days as we were just starting to go to market. I think that hopefully that risk paid off for these people. But yeah, I think that there's definitely, I mean, particularly with the AI stuff, there's probably a whole crop of new tools that could save a ton of time and have very high ROI if you're willing to take a little bit of a risk on these things. We are just about at time there, so I'm going to wrap things up. Before we go, if you guys could each just sort of share where people can find you online, or connect with you on LinkedIn, or just sort of plug your Twitter profile or wherever it is you might want people to get in touch with you, that'd be great. Sasha, we can start off with you. Where do people find you online?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn and Twitter. DMs are open, but if all else fails, we love feedback. Sasha at puzzle.io. If there's anything that we can build for you, or you have a suggestion of how we can make Puzzle better, or whatever else.
Awesome. Dora, where can people connect with you?
So yeah, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm available there. My email is pretty easy, so it's dor@deal.com.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, anything I can help with establishing the department, you want to get an advice, you want to speak, you want to see how you can buy Deal, I'm here.
Nice, perfect. And Dan, finally, where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. A little bit of a neophyte when it comes to social media, but you can send me an email at dan@mercury.com.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. This was super fun. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll share the recording out via our newsletter in the next few weeks if you had to leave at some point. And yeah, really appreciate you guys taking the time, and hopefully we can do this again at some point.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Cheers. All the best. Bye-bye.